Hello and welcome to today's episode of Velocity Kinetics. It's an unusual Swacecast because petrol prices have gone through the roof. I currently really shouldn't use my car more than I need to avoid spending out a lot on petroleum. So here we are. So I've got a few things I want to go through today, so let's roll a sting. I had a separate discussion about fuel prices, which I shall insert here. I have no idea what part of a video this is going to go in, so it might be tacked onto the end of a Swacecast or something, but just something I'm trying to unpack mentally at the moment. So on the day of recording this section, whenever the rest of the video goes out with it, it's the 19th of March. Petrol prices in the UK have now hit an 18-month high. A garage near me, a fuel forecourt not too far away from me, is selling diesel at £1.66 a litre. All because of what's happened in Iran and Trump. I'm not going to try avoiding getting too far into this, because people who watch this will know my political leanings and what my thoughts on Mr. Trump are. Now, my concern is, I read something recently. Now, I can't remember where I read it. I suspect it was the Daily Express, just based on the type of article it was. I'd have to track back through my phone's history to see. That suggested they were proposing potentially bringing in fuel rationing and a new temporary national speed limit of 50 miles an hour. So that means reducing it from 70 on the dual carriageway and the motorways down to 50, and then national speed limit roads from 60 down to 50. Now, obviously, there will be some benefit in terms of fewer emissions, in theory, going further on your fuel, but it's not that simple. They're potentially doing this because of how much fuel is being bought. Now, what I believe they should have done is a concept that I refer to as backwards economics. I don't know what the actual term is for it. I know the term Keynesian economics, but I have no idea what it is. Or at least since finishing my degree, I've never had to use that term again. So why would I know what it is anymore? And it's ironic that actually I've just forgot I'm wearing this with golf sponsorship. And ironic that I'm talking about what's going on. The problem is, at least on this front, with the potential fuel shortages we might be about to experience or are experiencing, because the reports vary a lot. The problem is, if you put the price of petrol up at the pump, and I'm just going to say petrol, I'm going to bounce back and forth between petrol and fuel, I mean petrol and diesel, but if you put the price of it up at the pump, and not just by a penny or two a litre, when it goes up overnight by as much as 5 pence a litre and more, people are, of course, going to do a quick splash and dash because they don't know how much more it's going to get. So they've seen lots of people apparently coming in going, oh, it's a bit more expensive, but I'll just top my tank off whilst I'm here. But the other problem with that is if you're the sort of person that needs, at least prior to the Iran situation, if you're the sort of person that only needs to put in £20 a week in your tank, at least based on the prices at that point, that's fine. Suddenly, that £20 isn't £20 anymore. That's possibly doing £15 worth of fuel, and then in turn you've got to go to the pump again. So I do suspect there is an element of profiteering in this, and compared to the rest of the world, I do believe the UK is fairly unique in having the fuel duty tax that we have, and then the value-added tax on the fuel duty tax, and we'll go down that taxation rabbit hole a little later, maybe not in this video, but it, as James may well stated and see his taxation rant from Top Gear a number of years ago, relating to the congestion charge. So what I mean is, I hope I'm making myself clear in what I'm talking about, and this is where the element of backwards economics comes in. Rather than increasing fuel dramatically, keep it at the same sort of level so it stays at the same sort of consumption by people, which then in turn means that other prices, such as mortgage interest rates, and I really do not understand how mortgage interest rates are tied to what's going on in the Middle East. It just seems like a good excuse for people to print money, to be honest. That is more my own probable ignorance. I'm sure there is, actually, if you understand it all, and I'm imagining Chris Kohler, Australian guy, he does a lot of really good simple economics videos. I imagine he'll probably do something about it if he hasn't already. So if people are going to keep topping up with fuel as they need, because they need to, then of course it's going to run out. But also it comes around to that, and it also originates in a meme. So I just realised my contact lenses are going to go dry if I leave them how they were. It's also in a meme that 20 quid in the gas tank ain't 20 quidding anymore. It's $20. I saw it on Reddit originally. It's that general sentiment. Of course, people are going to buy when they can afford it. When Sarah got paid, she didn't need much fuel. In fact, we probably could have gone easily another couple of weeks, if not longer. But because of how much it had shot up, we filled up. We became part of that problem. My Volvo has only got a quarter of a tank left, and when I get paid tomorrow, from the day of recording, I'm going to have to fill that up, and I'm filling it up all the way, because it has a big fuel tank, at least bigger compared to bigger than my other cars. It's going to, I'm going to become part of the problem. I'm going to spend a small bloody fortune. Then, if you're the sort of person who claims your club card and your Nectar points, or whatever other schemes you have, they're also not going to be worth as much, because then eventually, as you're spending more, they will probably stop rewarding you quite as much for spending on the fuel. Then you'll end up seeing people turning to putting fuel on the credit card to be able to afford the same amount of petrol. And we're going from a fueling problem to potentially causing a massive debt problem just by people trying to stay afloat. Now, this wouldn't be so much of a problem if there wasn't such the anti-work from home sentiment coming down from the top of most organisations, whether that's local or private, public, if that work from home sentiment wasn't being eroded and people were still very happy to work from home, but now people have got to start going to the office again, suddenly they've got to start commuting more and paying more. I've asked my work, because they've asked us to start going back to the office 1 day a week. I mean, I haven't as of yet, simply because the train ticket's £80 if I book it 6 weeks out. If I had to go tomorrow, it's going to be about £100, plus my parking for my car, plus my petrol for my car. It's suddenly not very ideal. And I've only got to go from Bury St Edmunds to London. We're not talking a stupid distance. And then I've got to get from the train station in London to the office, but that's just a straightforward walk. That's the free bit, apart from maybe getting stabbed whilst in London, because it is London. Did I mention I don't like London? I suppose you could say this is creating a brilliant argument for synthetic fuel. If we can make it just as good as traditional fossil fuels, and obviously greener and more eco-friendly, more sustainable. I believe there is some way, I'm sure Richard Hammond's talks about where they do it as carbon capture, and somehow, even though they're creating petrol and going into a car and burning it, it still somehow is a net carbon reduction. Now, if that is true, then fantastic. We need to do that. But if fuel keeps going up the way it is, I can only speak for the UK, but I imagine it's the same across the board. Never mind people struggling to put food on the table, keep the roof over their head, and in places like America where they pay for their healthcare, the ability to get sick or not get sick, it's going to have a knock-on impact on so many other things. People aren't going to see family as much because they can't afford to go. People won't just go out for a jaunt because they can't. They won't go for a day out. It's a massive knock-on effect, and as usual, it is the car driver that fits the bill. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't a veiled and screw you EV drivers type joke or comment, because it's not. EV drivers are insulated from this, and that is a given. Is even if electricity and gas goes up per unit, they still won't experience the same problem that the conventional internal combustion motorists will have. And in turn, I suppose in turn you're creating, it's creating more and more a case of, so why aren't they taxed again? Remind me why EV drivers aren't taxed at the same way a conventional petrol car is, or conventional diesel. It is mind-boggling, to say the least, that we find ourselves in this situation. And the other problem is if whatever's happening in Iran finished tomorrow and everything went back to normal, the Strait of Hormuz was free and gas and oil tankers could flow through, and all the infrastructure that's been destroyed gets rebuilt at the snap of a finger. The way fuel prices work, at least in the UK, and I believe it's the same around the rest of the world, it follows a model called rocket rise and feather fall, i.e. as soon as an impact may or may not be felt, it goes up. But as soon as it's all gone back down, petrol prices don't typically come back down. The organisations do use it as a way to pad their pockets. And I know for some organisations like Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, where fuel for a number of years was a loss leader, they are going to take every advantage they can to pad their profit margins with fuel sales. That's assuming they're even part of the same group. Never mind the smaller independent retailers and things. So it's just baffling at the moment. And I wish I was exaggerating. I wish I was wrong. I wish that this was a bad dream of some description. But none of it seems to be. And I'm at a point now where Sarah and I are meant to be going to Newcastle in a few weeks. We don't know what car to take, because the Volvo needs a run, and it's a catch-22. The Volvo needs another long run, so its fuel economy becomes better. The more short journeys it does, the worse its fuel economy it's gonna be. But it costs more to fill it up. The Swace also needs a long journey, but it's hybrid, so it won't drink quite as much fuel, and it's a smaller fuel tank. However, that is also doing a big journey in May when we go to Scotland. So it's getting a long run at some point. It's, whilst it needs one, it's getting a nearly 10-day exclusive use. More than that, I think it's nearly 2-week exclusive use, if I remember the dates correctly, in May. So that one's going to be fine. And even though it's a smaller fuel tank at 35 litres, that's still going to cost a bomb, regardless of whether I use the 95 or the 99 ROM. That is going to cost a small fortune. So we don't know what car to take up to Newcastle. And Sarah and I were discussing this the other day. We're now worried that we're going to drive up to where we're going to in Scotland, assuming they haven't put a massive fuel rationing in place, and basically said, if you've got holidays in the UK, cancel it, and so on. Which, if that happens, then what the fuck? But we're worried it's going to cost us so much to go. And it wasn't exactly going to be cheap in the first place with what fuel prices are. Even with the Swace and its hybrid ability, because there's a couple of stretches of the M6 that are mostly downhill, and from experience when we went there last time, it cruised for a few miles just in electric only because of the hills. Well, at least I'm sure it's a few miles. I could be wrong. Certainly it cruised for a number of long distances just on electric only. But we're now worried that we're gonna go to Scotland and it's going to be so expensive, especially if fuel continues to rise. We're not going to be able to do a damn thing that isn't within walking distance, or teasing the Swace in electric only distance. And that's just one couple. The illustration of how it affects one couple. Never mind if you've got children who've got activities they need to do, cubs, scouts, dance, what have you. Never mind if you want to take them to see grandparents. Never mind whatever other commitments you've got, whether you've got to travel for a meeting, whether you're going to go on your own holiday and got the luxury of going abroad. You've still got to get to the airport, and whether you're going to take a taxi or whether you're going to drive, or whether you're going to get a bus and things, that's all going to go up. Yeah. But I'd be willing to bet if they'd left fuel prices alone, I'm very confident if they'd left fuel prices alone, we wouldn't be in quite the same pickle we currently are. Fucking amazing, isn't it? One orange madman, and suddenly you can't afford your mortgage and you can hardly afford to drive to work. Utter madness. Now, what's infuriating is after I've recorded that, I had to then fill my car up with fuel. A couple of days later, it was 146.5 for the higher octane fuel, which I tend to prefer. But also because the Volvo, because I don't know how long it stood, I don't know how it was driven, I thought if I use some higher octane, at least for a few fill-ups, I'll help clear it out and make sure it's all good. Instead, so I'm also half working at the same time. So it was about that, and then Sarah went and filled up not 4 days later. 3 days, I think, actually. It had gone up by 5 pence a litre. Now, I know there's supply and demand, and as I mentioned, they're trying to manage supplies. Since I recorded that previous bit, I've seen something, granted I think it was in the Express, which is not, in the UK, at least the greatest of and most reliable of resources for news. They were saying that potentially we might be seeing fuel rationing come in, and people may be limited to £30 at the pump at a time, which, depending on how much that is, it's all very well saying you can limit people to £30, of petrol or diesel. But if it's well on the way to £2 a litre, that's not that. It may not even be 20 litres. Now, in a car like my Swace with a 35-litre fuel tank, about 20 litres, not ideal, but it's over half a tank. We can do some good running. In my Volvo, which has I believe a 55-litre fuel tank, we're well under half. And even if I've got that number wrong and it's only a 50-litre fuel tank, that's still under half. It's ridiculous. And everything that's going on at the moment, fuel companies seem to be profiteering to an unknown degree. Then there's more tax coming in left, right and centre. But it's also got me wondering. Sarah's been looking at cars recently. She's got a long list of things she would like, things she's seen on the road that she'd actually like to have a sit in, and I don't think that's unfair. Because as it is, whilst it's not wrong for me to have both my name on both cars and be the owner for both, she will in no doubt feel limited by what she's allowed to do, even if it's hers in principle. My brother's felt the same when I've lent him my Honda, even though I've said when I had the Honda, should I say, even though I'd say, look, go as far as you want, do what miles you want, drive it as hard as you want, just if you break it, you pay for it, and just don't return it empty. And he doesn't, because he doesn't feel like it's his car to do that with, which I do understand. We went and looked at a JQ 7 last weekend. That would be the weekend of the 21st, actually. It was the 21st we went and looked at the JQ. And they were talking about all this extra tax it's going to be, and I'm going to go into this separately because I want to do a separate video on the JQ, but shall we say learning about the full extent of the luxury car tax, how long it comes into play for, and everything. It's just like, you want the economy to move with people buying things, but if you're going to tax people for buying things, they're not going to buy things. I know this is turning into a very political and financial moan or talk, but you can't get away from that at the moment, and I don't like it. There is something that I've seen in the clip I've put in. I did say now I don't understand how what's happened in Iran affects my mortgage rate and things, and I've subsequently seen, and forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, I'm going to say Martin Lewis's name, not because he's talking rubbish, but if you've worked in the bank or customer services, particularly during PPI, his name is vile and horrible to say, because it took him until nearly the end of PPI to start telling people to be nice to those answering the phone. Granted, I don't disagree that maybe he shouldn't have He shouldn't have needed to say it, but doesn't alter my view. But he did do on his Facebook page, it was like a explain it to me like I'm 5 thing. I still don't really understand it, but there is at least a better explanation. And go look at is it Martin Lewis or is it Money Saving Expert? Either way, Martin Lewis's explanation on there. Anyway, as I mentioned, I spoke a few minutes ago. I'm going to do a separate video about the JQ. Problem is I haven't got the car to walk around it or anything, and it was a brief test drive, so can't get too much into it. But it was quite a surprise. Not my cup of tea, and the problem is because Sarah does like that SUV style vehicle, I'm going to be having to drive something that is not my cup of tea. And she has basically said I need to get over myself on that. Well, maybe not put it that bluntly, but I suppose I do need to get over myself. That's the way the car market is moving. But we went years, decades with saloons and estates being perfectly normal. I don't see why the SUV now needs to be normal. I suppose the other bit that I find awkward about the SUV, and it's the same on this JQ. The JQ in question, the 7, is sort of very big, Range Rover-y type dimensions, but it's 2-wheel drive, standard, and that's the same thing with a lot of SUVs, in my opinion. Too many of them are just 2-wheel drive, and maybe I'm being overly logical. I don't see the point in having a vehicle that is built like an off-roader, that has the ground clearance off an off-roader, has, granted there might be mock skid plates, but the skid plates, mock or not, of an off-roader. I don't get why. Now, a lot of people go, well, you don't need all-wheel drive all the time. It's like, yeah, but you can argue we don't need SUVs all the time. That's my quibble with it at the moment. It's hard to understand, to me at least, why we need them, and why so many of them don't come equipped with all-wheel drive out the box. Because what's the point in having a vehicle with that much ground clearance, with that much, in theory, possibility to go, even if it's not very far off-road, not your hardcore rock crawling and things like that, just a bit more capable of getting across a muddy field? What's the point? And I do stand by that. However, I do also have to agree, but I do also agree that if it's an off-roader just on street tires, even with 4-wheel drive, it's just on road tires, so it's not going to get very far, further than its 2-wheel drive compatriot probably, but still not very far. And you're not wrong. I remember my godfather telling me once at a scout event that he went to, he had a Skoda Octavia at the time, and he had winter tires on it. In his Skoda Octavia winter tires, he was overtaking on this gravel trail Range Rovers that were still on street tires, and the Range Rovers had 4-wheel drive and limited slip diffs and locking diffs and things. So there is something to be said for the rubber that goes on them. But in my head, it's very hard to justify having a vehicle styled to do one job that it can't actually do without actually being able to do the job. You know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but that's my thoughts on it. I'm happier with SUVs that can actually do the off-roading. So when we were in the Q5 that had Quattro, I felt better for knowing that it could do it. And the Disco Sport, when we sat in it, I was happier, not because it was a Land Rover or because of whatever premium, but it wasn't because it was, it's because you want an Audi, you want the prestige of an Audi, you want the prestige of a Land Rover. Like, no, I don't, because I was happy knowing that a Kodiaq could come with all-wheel drive, and that's what I would spec on it. I believe the Karoq can come with it as well, which I'd be happy having, knowing it could do that. And the same with, I can't think what the other thing was I looked at. I was happier when I found out the you have to specify it, I think it was on the JQ5, could come with all-wheel drive, and that was like, okay, that's better to know. I suppose it's why I feel a bit better about some of the electric hybrids that I've seen kicking around, the twin motor stuff, because they are technically all-wheel drive. When I've seen things like, I think it was it the Symbios or the Scenic, that was that was meant to be electric and have all that actually sorting that. Very disappointing. The recent visit to Renault, nothing new and nothing brand new apart from the Renault 5, but that wasn't what we were going to look at. We'd gone to look at the Scenic and the Symbioz, and they had none, or rather they had one, but it had been sold, so naturally the car was locked, so no one could fiddle with it. Disappointing. And the dealership in question, they used to be Renault only, and they used to have a little Mitsubishi bit out on it as well. Now they're Renault, Dacia, and something else, all rolled into MG. That's it, Renault, Dacia, and MG. Jack of all trades and a master of none. Did find a couple of good Clios though. That if that potentially, if I know Sarah doesn't like the Clio, so I would never have bought one. But knowing my brother likes it, I've sent them on to him because I think he could potentially do with a car. But ultimately, that's up to him. And with the way fuel has gone up, even if he could afford to pay for a car, I don't think he could now afford to pay for the fuel, which is another interesting point about fuel. So it's like, great, any new drivers to the market who might be able to have just about afforded a car and the fuel can now afford the car but not the fuel, or the fuel but not the car. Was it in the Ben Aronovich book, the Rivers of London series? What fresh wankery has been added to this fuckery? And never has such a quote felt so accurate to me, at least. But I need to get off this topic because otherwise I'm going to be stuck, and you're gonna spend however long this eventually ends up being. Based on most Swacecasts, it's typically 40-ish minutes of talk. So I want to go on to the Formula One. We're not going to touch on the races being the races that are potential. If they haven't been cancelled, they are potentially going to be cancelled. But I believe they actually are cancelled, like Bahrain and things like and Qatar. I don't think we'll miss too much from those. It would have been nice to have seen them. The only disappointing thing with if Bahrain is going off the calendar, just because of the conflict in the Middle East at the moment, it'd be disappointing to. I suppose we've got to wait for Barcelona for it, but because they did all the testing, most of the testing in Bahrain, it'd be nice to see just how they could. Somewhere they've tested, somewhere they know, somewhere they harvested a lot of data on these cars, just how much better they could make it there. And I don't mean as in the track and the racing on other years. I just mean all the worries that they've had. It'd be interesting. It's a bit like if I can't think where I saw it now. It might have been somewhere on Reddit, actually, where someone suggested what would be cool. They said even though it's not likely to happen in the light of Bahrain and things being cancelled, but what would be interesting is to return back to Australia, the first race of the season, at the end of the season, to see how much they've learned with these new cars and see how much different the racing would be. And it's a very interesting theory. I actually quite like what I see. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. What's happened with Honda, Aston Martin, that's unforgivable. Honda have dropped the ball, whether that is dropped it by themselves or Aston Martin have also dropped it because they haven't talked to Honda, I don't know, but it sounds very similar to the McLaren problem, where McLaren wouldn't talk to Honda and Honda wouldn't talk to McLaren. But Toro Rosso, as it was back then, and Red Bull talked to Honda, found out what they needed, which I think is where Aston Martin has gone wrong. And allegedly, if it's to be believed, no one from Aston Martin went to Sakura until November, December last year. It's like, I'm sorry, you cannot have your main engine partner. I appreciate the Japanese have their own way of conducting business, much like the Canadians, the Americans, the British, the Germans, the French. Every country has their own way of conducting business. And I do believe, at least from what I've read, and the Michael Crichton book called Rising Sun covers a lot of this. Granted, it's a fairly old book, but I do believe practices have not really changed. You can very easily offend Japanese business. They take offence quite easily. And they're very difficult to work with. They're very hard to they won't acknowledge fault, and I believe that's still the case because Suzuki wouldn't acknowledge fault on one of my cars. It was awkward. But like I say, if you're partnering up as a works provider, why was no one from Honda at Aston Martin? Why was no one from Aston Martin at Honda? I appreciate there would have been some restrictions over what they could see with Mercedes, but I'm sure Mercedes would have also started not telling Aston Martin everything, knowing that they were going with Honda. And they're talking about the vibration. Now, don't get me wrong, if it vibrates anything like my 3-cylinder did, and that was only, that was, what's it, 6.5 it could go to, and the way it rough idled, if that is anything to go by, when you've doubled the number of cylinders and increased the RPM to a lot, then I can probably attest to that would be quite hard, because that when my Civic's power boost did a rough idle, the whole car vibrated. It was horrible. It was unpleasant. And you got the viral footage of Fernando doing that with his hands as he was going down the straight, because I think that Aston Martin is fucking fast, because other years when Adrian Newey vehicles haven't been very quick, haven't had the reliability, they've been quick. I think if they could shove a Mercedes engine in the back of that Honda now, I think it would be quite fucking rapid. Heck, even with the old Renault engine, it would probably be pretty bloody rapid. There's been a lot of talk about the racing, and a lot of people getting very stroppy, pissy, however you wish to describe it. From what I've seen now, I haven't been able to watch the races live, because I can't, as much as I want to. I haven't got the facilities to, i.e. I don't pay for Sky, and I'm not pirating the stream, but I'm also not leaving Sarah to be an F1 widow. Unless she chooses to watch it with me, that's fine, but she hasn't been in the mood to, / I've had other things to do. There's not a lot I can do on that front, but the highlights I've seen, holy crap, the racing's been so much better. I know it might be highly artificial, but I think we're obsessed. F1 as a whole is obsessed with this idea of close racing, and the problem that no one seems to understand, or the elephant in the room that no one wishes to acknowledge, is every rules cycle someone gets it right. So there will be a runaway car. Someone always gets it wrong. I was to say every year someone gets it wrong, not necessarily every rules cycle, but as in not wanting gets it wrong the entire time. Granted, though, Williams did spend a lot of their time at the back, so shots fired, and Alpine have had it wrong, / Renault have had it wrong. But someone always gets it wrong, so there will always be someone, comparatively speaking, miles off the back. That just happens. In the middle, in the 90s, a lot of overtakes happened in the pits. In the early 2000s, a lot of overtaking happened in the pits, because it was a series of sprints. DRS, one car shed the drag to be able to pass. You're not going to get the racing. And now with this super clipping, whatever you wish, I believe super clipping is the correct word actually, term. Sorry. So with the super clipping, you're suddenly having cars run out of energy, or have one car having more energy to overtake. Something I saw on social media today. I think it was on Facebook actually. Something allegedly Lewis Hamilton said. And I say allegedly because it wasn't on Lewis Hamilton's page itself, so it wasn't him putting out an actual point privately. I believe it was Autosport that put the post out, or just a general F1 page, and Lewis was saying, well, this is the sort of racing in go-karting, and people call that one of the purest forms of racing. So what we've got now is go-kart racing, where there is a lot of this yo-yo, back and forth, swaps. So what's the problem? And you know what? I happen to agree with Lewis. From what I have seen, I happen to agree. The cars do sound a bit better on the TV. I believe they sound a lot better in person. That Honda still sounds angry. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but perhaps with its vibrations. Actually, you could hear it vibrating something rotten on the TV. Within that anger, the way it sounded, it's like, that just sounds unhealthy. I will say, what I haven't liked is the number of cars I've seen not able to take the start. And my precious Williams have had that happen. McLaren have had it. One of the Astons has had it. The Audis have had it. It shows how complicated these new cars are. There is now a new controversy going on that the Mercedes front wing isn't working in a completely legal manner. So is George Russell now going to be stripped of, and Kimi Antonelli actually, Are they both going to be stripped of what wins they've had? I'm not a Ferrari fan myself. I do, much like Williams, if I wasn't a Williams fan, I would appreciate the history and tradition that they brought into the sport, and they have a legacy there, a bit like McLaren. Whether you like McLaren or not, they are a legacy team. But I'm pleased to see Ferrari back up towards the front at the moment. I say at the moment because there have been other years where they've been like that and then suddenly dropped the ball. This might be as good a year as any for Lewis to get number 8, and I know a lot of people might say number 9, but I would argue the years in McLaren, was it 2011, 2012, where someone did the maths. If McLaren hadn't bungled their pit stops, if he'd finished where he finished in the positions he was in before the bungled pit stops, he would have stood a good chance of being champion. If he wasn't actually mathematically champion, he'd have stood a good chance of fighting for it all the way to the end. It's a good chance for that to happen. It's possible we might get another new world champion. So we might get a new one in the form of Russell or Antonelli or Leclerc as well, because it is possible that things may swing his way, although I wouldn't be at all surprised if it turned out to be that Ferrari pushed team orders to make it so Lewis came out on top. Because financially speaking, if you've managed to make your driver an 8-time world champion, the sponsors and the money is just going to keep rolling in from a business perspective. From a sporting perspective, it's not fair. Financial perspective, more money is more money. I do hate that people are giving these rules, decrying these rules before they even had a chance to go through. People decried KERS when it first came in, and granted it was quickly dropped, or at least it wasn't. Yes, it was dropped. It came in and then was dropped, but some teams ran it all year because it was believed the power boost was worth the weight offset. And if I remember rightly, the year, not that year, 2009, when Kimi Raikkonen won at Belgium, it was only because he had KERS. Otherwise, Giancarlo Fisichella would have gotten Force India its first win. It was only KERS that was keeping him ahead at that point. I don't get me wrong. I do see that there are places that this is going to go horribly wrong. It is noticeable when the super clipping kicks in on the TV screen, and I agree with everyone who, particularly on Reddit, who said, "Well, that's not right. F1 are stopping pause the graphic on the speed when the clipping kicks in, because you can visibly see the car slowing down." And I don't disagree. I think they should be able to charge as much as they can to prove the maximum technology value in doing what they're doing. Because arguably it's a far more powerful version of what my Swace does. Why not have them harvest everywhere that they can? Constantly deploy it as big a battery as they can. Granted, I appreciate they're working with huge amounts of battery and voltage, and that does create a safety concern. So, even if it comes out that, look, we ran simulations with bigger batteries and things, it was not safe. You know what? If that turns out why they've chosen the rules they've chosen, I'll be fine with it. But I suppose it's also not that far away from something Bernie Ecclestone wanted years ago. He wanted cars to enter the pit under electric only and leave under electric only. And that would potentially be a natural evolution of where they are now. I do want my Williams to do better, though, because of a bit of me is like, why did they have to change the rules then? Carlos getting on the podium, if Williams could have continued that same trajectory, I'd be willing to bet they could have fought for 1 or 2 wins if the season was a bit longer, or we had one more season of that rule set. World champion, possibly not, but regularly fighting when putting in competitive times, a la the McLaren, assuming the McLaren stayed the class of the field in one more cycle of the rules, one more run through of that rule set. Absolutely. There we are. I've got more work to do, and I cannot, as you've seen, I am failing to multitask. So we'll cut it there. I have no idea what's going to happen next. I do like to do my driving to drive with the Swacecast. It's a lovely way to talk and switch off and just do things. But if fuel keeps going the way it's going, that is not going to be possible. Financially, just can't afford casual jaunts. But we'll see what happens with the F1 going on. Drive safe. Look after yourselves.